Welcome to the World United. Welcome to the World United.
JAC Keeffe is a spiritual teacher and author of books Born to be Free and How to Be a Spiritual Rebel. She's also a founding member of the Association for Spiritual Integrity. This association encourages spiritual teachers and the community to support one another in a process of growth and spiritual development. JAC's work is driven by her capacity to envision the possible future of spirituality. She speaks about the required evolution of both teachers and methods to impact teachings to make spirituality relevant and applicable to regular life. In her teachings, JAC offers insights and skills so that every student is empowered in their own inner exploration. She helps them cultivate inner autonomy and encourages them to take responsibility in both their spiritual and human evolution. You can get more information about her from her website, JAC Keeffe. She's the founder of Association for Spiritual Integrity, and she's going to talk to us today about transforming the paradigm of spiritual leadership.
Could you introduce yourself to us?
Sure, I'm JAC Keeffe. I'm Irish and I live in the US. And I'm a spiritual teacher for about 12 years.
What do you teach and what are your methods to teach?
Every seeker's path is different. Each of us has our own path to walk. And so I give a tailored response depending on the person who's presenting their situation. So what that means is a combination of the direct path and the progressive path. The direct path means abiding in the depth of your being or the deepest opening to pure consciousness that you have access to. The personal path means healing your vasanas, going into conditioning, going into belief systems where you plug in and believe that you are your body, you are your mind. And so what I do is I find out what stops you from abiding in the stillness and how can we unravel your personal story that you still believe is your identity. So it's a blend of the direct path and the personal path, depending on the individual.
Hello, my name is Irene and I am a nurse from Western Canada. Recently, I returned from a 6-month assignment working for doctors.
That's an interesting take on your teaching because a lot of the traditional text would say that if you just abide in the stillness, that all of those personal things will resolve themselves. And I'm just curious, what made you deviate from that path?
I found that traditional modality, that approach, it works by and large if you're living in a protective collective, in a monastic ashram type spiritual community where you are disconnected from human life. Then the things that test our humanness are not triggered, are not activated. And so vasanas, it's not that they are dissolved by the abidance in your being, it's that they're not triggered. And so as we move into this era of being awakened and abiding in our awakening 24/7, as we rear children, as we homeschool, as we become horticulturists and bus drivers and whatever life asks of us. As we do that, how do we abide in the stillness? How do we function when we come from the recognition of the absolute? And so needing to make that shift of how does this show up in the world? We have to look at what do I need to heal and remove. And you know what? Abidance itself won't do it. It doesn't do it. And it's given rise to a lot of bad practice among spiritual leadership. And that's the topic that I want to speak about at this conference.
That's very interesting. And as you mentioned, the title of your talk is Transforming the Paradigm of Spiritual Leadership. Can you tell us a bit about what you saw in the field and why you think there's a need to transform the paradigm.
About 4 years ago, a few of us in the spiritual leadership sector spoke at the same conference about the same topic, noticing that why our spiritual leaders.
If you manage a team, you have to try Monday.com. Monday.com is a platform to track
behaving badly and denying it. And why are there not more skillful means to work with our students rather than abusing power, rather than justifying spirituality as a way to validate our bad behavior? So what we found is that there's a lack of self-reflection. There's a lack of taking responsibility for our own humanness, for our own evolution, for the natural drive to be a better human version of ourselves. And all of this happens without identification with the body-mind. And so that's the piece that's been missing in traditional spirituality and in religions. And in order to bridge spirituality into mainstream, which of course it is now, thanks to the internet, teachings are available everywhere. We've got to make it more cultural specific to our contemporary times. So we've got to see how would spiritual teachings interpret life as we know it now, working for a living, fluid gender. How do we work around racism? How do we look at the societal issues from a spiritualist perspective? And so where we have to start is, well, within my own sector, I can only change myself and discuss it with my own colleagues, really. And the ASI was set up in order to do this, in order to practice and advocate a model of transparency and personal accountability among spiritual leaders. And so it will give rise to a shift in the paradigm, a shift in the cultural context of ancient spiritual teachings to protect the sacredness and the truth embedded in it, but to not deny contemporary culture. And that's the shift that needs to happen. And I do firmly feel that we will become more skillful when we're better able to adapt ourselves to contemporary life as we embody whatever level of consciousness we have awakened to.
That's fascinating. I want to go back to something you mentioned in your earlier answer, that abiding in the absolute didn't necessarily burn out the conditioning, but because of the context, those pieces of conditioning are triggered. Why do you think denying or bypassing our humanness became so common in spiritual circles?
Part of it is because the last couple of thousand years were about protecting and safeguarding the teachings. And in doing so, humanness was ignored. It's like preserving was what they were about. And that phase is over now. The abidance, sure, it gives you understanding of the spirit of the conditioning, your phenomenal spiritual conditioning or cultural conditioning, gives you understanding of it.
Let's go!
Just wanted to give a huge shout out to Wesley Bill.
But we've never before had to look at how an abiding awakening shows up in the world. And part of the problem of the consequence of preserving the scripture was that the teacher was deified, was turned into a guru, was seen to be beyond their humanness. And so there was no accountability. There was an assumption that there would be no blind spot in someone's personality and in their brain if they had awakened to the absolute. And we know that this is not true. This is not true, that our humanness evolves whether or not there is identification with being human. And so to honor our humanness means to bring that into the picture. And deifying an awakened being it has caused a fair few hiding places for blind spots. And we're about doing better, educating ourselves, continuing the conversation in that Association for Spiritual Integrity. That's an organization I'm involved with, that I helped founded in order to have a platform to discuss, to learn, and to share our experiences as spiritual leaders.
So there's two things coming to mind as we continue this conversation. It seems that there's a layer of what you're sharing with us that is relevant for the student, in that the traditional path of removing oneself from the world may still have its time and place, but it can't be the full path. Mm. And the second is, what I'm hearing from you is that there is a need for the teachers themselves, those that do have an abiding awakening, that they also have an openness to reflect on their personality, their conditioning, things that may be hard to see if they are always in the role of the exalted teacher. And that leads me into what you've mentioned already. How do you see the role of the Association for Spiritual Integrity, and how is it helping spiritual teachers, leaders, and the community at large investigate some of these blind spots?
Because we're doing something new, and we're opening a platform where our human vulnerability demands us to be honest and respectful of each other's humanness. Because we have opened up this space, there are many in the traditional spiritual leadership role who are very suspicious, who think we're a policing, judging organization, which is exactly the opposite. It's about opening a place of transparency. And so it's threatening for many people. As a result, there's no point in us focusing on being an enormous organization. We focus on depth, honesty, transparency, an open-hearted approach to each other as colleagues rather than a competitive approach. And we seek to improve the entire culture of spirituality by modeling in some small way, by creating a new pattern in consciousness of where leadership can go, modeling something different individually and supporting each other as members of the ASI. And if anybody wants to know more about that organization, the website is spiritual-integrity.org. And if anybody's free, every 6 weeks we hold an open webinar where we discuss these things with a specific theme in mind in order to keep the conversation going and to resource ourselves as spiritual leaders.
Are vegans healthy? Are vegetarians healthy? French fries and beer are vegan.
That's interesting, and it's something that sounds like it's very needed. Mm-hmm. And I also heard the part that it threatens some. I wonder if you could share how either yourself or some of your colleagues have felt resourced by this, because I would imagine someone that has an awakening, the air starts to become very thin. Like who do you go to to be able to help, to be mirrored?
Yeah, that's the thing. And offering a mirroring support, not supervisory per se, but a supportive colleague. That is a resource that we're working on right now, how to introduce it. And we tried it in January of this year, it fell flat. And so but we're going at it now, learning. Again, it's like, let's try it from another angle in order to find the timing of when these ideas can be accepted by our community of spiritual leaders, a methodology that is appropriate for our culture. And so we're designing something new that hasn't been around before. And so gently and steady is how we're approaching everything we do in the ASI. Because there isn't any model for this. We don't know what it's going to look like. However, as long as we're growing and we can trust each other and we continue the dialogue and share ideas with each other, then we're learning. And so when I attend these webinars, it expands my understanding of what my colleagues experience. And so people outside of the webinar are connecting with each other. And so automatically there's a network of support emerging. And what works, let's build on it. And that's more the role of the ASI. What's working, let's build on it. Because none of us know where it's going. It's about listening to see what does the culture of spirituality need next. And so my talk at the upcoming conference will be about looking at this in depth to see what can each one of us as a spiritual leader, what can we take from this? How can we be more responsible for ourselves, for the power that we have individually and that we are given by our students? Do we abuse that power, or do we respect the students' power also? Do we receive feedback? There are so many ways of exploring the power differential between spiritual leaders and our community and our students in order to have a mutually respectful relationship. That and many other topics are what's involved in transforming the paradigm of spiritual leadership. And I look forward to chatting further at the conference itself.
Thank you so much, Jack, for giving us your time today. I'd really like to acknowledge the courage that you and your peers who set this organization up have in this effort, because it would be very easy to take this topic and just apply it to students, but you're challenging your peers and myself and yourself and doing your part to evolve spirituality. And I think that's admirable, and